Okay, so now that we've learned all of that, we don't need to learn it all again. We can just use the multiplier effect to think about different variations. And the first variation we want to think about is what happens if we want to hit upwards. And between hitting flat, hitting upwards and hitting downwards, we'll have every other variation encoded in our potential movement. And if we think about this one as a problem, the solution is really easy. We just think about the ratio of the four contexts, the four primary contexts. And instead of using open, we use 50% open and 50% rise, and that just modifies the posture. And don't think about these postures in terms of applications. This is where people really get right off track, where they're looking at movements in forms and saying, oh, what's that for? What's that posture for? Instead, think about the body mechanics that are involved in the posture. That's what we're training. If you train all these different variations, lateral, downwards, upwards, your body will find the right application in the moment. Of course, you do practice techniques and think about techniques, but if you get the body mechanics right, your body itself will find the application in the moment. And that's how you end up with really great reactions like what I've got. I mean, some of that stuff that I do in sparring, I look back and I think, I myself have no idea how I do that. It's just that if you practice the basic body mechanics and then you practice a range of techniques around that, your body just has this adaptability. Anyway, the first thing that we want to think about this posture is that it's a bigger posture than the lateral Buddha's judgment strike. So just the fact that you're lifting the whole structure up higher adds more volume in it. And it might not look like a massive difference, but across your whole body, it adds up to a much bigger difference than it looks like. And that's one of the key secrets as such in Yiquan. Of course, there are no secrets because if you just practice, your body itself tells you these things. So let's look at some of the basics of the posture and the differences between the other posture, beginning with the basic stance. So get into our normal basic stance, and what we're going to do first of all is we're going to lift, and we're going to lift from the head pushing down into the foot. And if you don't know this, one of the key oppositional forces that's identified in each one is between the top of the head and the soles of the feet, and that's intended to convey this idea of pushing up and pushing against the ground. And although it sounds obvious as a concept, we want to feel it physically like a spring that's been compressed and then suddenly expands, and it springs up and the arm springs out with it. But one of the things you've got to get the intuitive feeling for is that obviously that splits, so the feet are apart, so the head's pushing up, that's one point pushing up, but then the feet split, the force is being set down on the back leg, but the lead leg is pushing up and bracing the posture. That's not a big deal, you feel it just naturally, I'm just pointing it out. The thing we really need to think about is that the lead foot braces the posture. So what does that mean in this case? Because the posture is going up. So when we were hitting out laterally, we could brace against it, but now we've got to change the angle of the foot, bring it up a bit more and push up, so bracing against the upward strike. And because the foot is going up higher, there's a little bit more volume just in the foot, so we can spring up and get a little bit more spring in that posture. Every little bit of power helps. This is the real science of each one, not some nonsense about mystical forces. And if you are paying close attention to this science, in this example, you will see that we add in a little bit of extra volume here because there's something else going on. We are doing this posture with the little bit of spiral force to generate more volume in the first place. So we're doing the first version, the least cultivated version. And the finishing part of the posture with the strike is combining 50% open with 50% rise. But that's mirrored at the beginning of the posture with the beginning of the spiral force. So with the lateral Buddha's judgment hit, we just used close into open. Well, now we need to put 50% close and 50% sink into the beginning of that spiral movement. So down and close and then rise and open. Down and close, rise and open. So we're actually making the spiral force more complex because we're adding in more contexts. And whether the posture is what we call screwing force or whether it's whole body spiral force, it's the same in principle. This is how you add more volume and therefore create more potential for power, but within a more compacted space by adding in this kind of spiral movement. Clever, isn't it? Okay, so now let's think about what the quad does. So it's going to dip down with close first, and then it's going to lift up. And at the lifting up point, the front part of the quad is going to be higher than the back part, and that's obviously significantly in part because you're up on the pivot root. So again, it's not just an arbitrary cultural set judgment to use a pivot root. If you want to get this posture right, you have to do this. It helps you tip the quad up. Or you don't have to do it, but you lose force. So even though these movements seem tiny, when they're done explosively, remember you can reach maximum velocity in the space of a Chinese inch with a movement like this. And it all adds up into power that you need in the critical moments if you start removing things like the pivot root. Next, look carefully at the elbow here, and you can see that it's actually elbowing down. And this is something you've got to change from elbowing out laterally to elbowing down. So it's coming forward a little bit and then it's elbowing back and down. And you can see that more clearly from the other side. And this movement has also got to be phased with the lifting of the quad, so it doesn't go at exactly the same time. As the quad lifts up, then a split second later the elbow hits down. And this is all about timing it, a kind of slingshot movement. This is all really subtle elements of cultivation. So now look at every aspect of the posture together. Notice all the screwing force in the different parts of the posture, the Shaolin style block, then the lift up in the phase, and see the arm. The head's going to be the last movement when I do it full power, but everything combines to lock at the final lock point. And one of the good ways, of course, to practice this is just to do it slowly, and you can see it lift up right into the lock point. By doing it slowly, you give your body a chance to knit together and get the posture absolutely correct. Write the code for the hardware before you start doing the actual posture explosively. And then when you do start doing it explosively, first just take a moment, just feel the posture in your body, and then just try and trigger it instantly. And this is the version with the little bit of close and down first. And you can see that it is a little bit of a tell, and people can see that, but your reactions will get good enough to see that because it won't be about your conscious thoughts. When you're sparring and stuff like that, things happen that are, well, the Chinese saying is thinking skin, but you'll see stuff on a subconscious level and react to it, so your body will pick up that little bit of a movement. And in this example, you can see that I'm trying to make it much smaller, so I'm losing that tell. So it's hardly there at all, because this is the more cultivated version that we want to look at. And just like the lateral hit, we do exactly the same thing. We take that movement out of the hip and put it in the shoulder. You know, and let's be clear, it's also a matter of improving your overall ability to use your body efficiently over time. That's a key aspect of it. And again, timing. So look at how the oppositional force is used. The screwing force goes back and the hit isn't at exactly the same time. It's timed so that it can slingshot from the oppositional force. So more explosive force in the far lee of the elbow back, more explosive screwing force. Getting that elbow and shoulder going open and more down. And then explosively lifting up off the floor, trying to get a little bit more screwing force from the floor. So just trying to just tweak everything to get a little bit more into it. So taking out that little bit of close, and then instead just trying to launch it straight away. And if we compare this posture to its closest living relative, which is the chopping up hook, it's a very similar movement, except that in the chopping up hook you don't have that bigger movement. As soon as the elbow goes back, it just chops up in one like that, so you don't have the phase. Everything just lifts up into the chopping up hook. But when we do it with the forearm strike, we're going to put a big phase in like that. You can see the difference. It doesn't happen at the same time. The chopping up hook is just dink straight in. It transmits more force, so you can just do it on a count of one, whereas the chopping up forearm strike is a count of 1-2 because it's phased with the spiral movement. And again, you can see the posture from a different angle, chopping up hook, just one whole movement like that, and you've got to get all your explosive force into that. But then when we do the hit with the forearm, phase it, 1-2, everything becomes expanded, and that adds more volume into the strike to compensate for the fact that there isn't the same degree of force transmission as there is in the chopping up hook. And this is so often missed in Yiquan, that it's not just about force generation, it's about force transmission. That's what determines how you stack the posture primarily. And if you're practicing this posture and looking for the anchor for it, think about that elbow going back. Wang Shenchai says movement on the left begins on the right. So timing it with that explosive lift up from the floor, elbowing down and getting the whole thing, the whole timing of the phase. I mean, that's the art of it, really. That's the difficult thing. That's one of the key elements of cultivation. Timing everything so that even though things aren't happening at the same time, they all add into slingshotting into the final transmission of force.